Bacon's Rebellion, the poor's revolt against colonial oppression.
But before we start, please support us by pressing like and subscribe buttons. Also turn on the bell notification to get the latest updates. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you.
In the sweltering heat of the Virginia summer of 1676, the smoke of rebellion curled above the tidewater plantations and forests, signaling a defiance that would echo across centuries. This was no simple frontier dispute, no passing squabble among landowners. Bacon's rebellion was, at its heart, a cry from the poor and disenfranchised against the heavy hand of colonial authority. It was a desperate stand by the laboring class, indentured servants, landless freemen, and restless frontiersmen, against the entrenched elite who ruled the Virginia colony with privilege and power. The roots of rebellion had long been growing beneath the surface of Virginia's plantation society. For decades, English settlers had arrived on promises of land and prosperity, only to be met with the harsh realities of debt, servitude, and a ruling class that monopolized the best land and controlled the colonial government. As the century wore on, land became scarce, wealth concentrated in fewer hands, and tensions between the haves and the have-nots deepened. At the center of this storm was Nathaniel Bacon, a well-born but volatile young Englishman who had arrived in Virginia in 1674. Though a member of the gentry himself, Bacon quickly found common cause with the poor farmers and laborers who simmered with resentment toward the colonial elite. He was ambitious, charismatic, and consumed with a desire for action, qualities that would make him both a leader of men and a dangerous threat to the established order. Virginia's governor, Sir William Berkeley, was everything Bacon was not. An aging royalist with decades of service to the crown, Berkeley was cautious, elitist, and increasingly out of touch with the plight of the colony's lower classes. His government favored wealthy planters, protected the Indian trading monopolies of a privileged few, and largely ignored the suffering of those living on the edges of the colony, where skirmishes with native tribes were growing more frequent and deadly. It was these frontier attacks that sparked the flame of rebellion. Desperate settlers begged Berkeley to sanction a militia to defend their homes and retaliate against the Susquehannock and other tribes they blamed for the bloodshed. But Berkeley, wary of jeopardizing lucrative trade relationships with the tribes and unwilling to arm the lower classes, refused. Into this void stepped Bacon. Ignoring the governor's commands, he raised his own militia composed of frustrated farmers, ex-servants, and adventurers, men with nothing to lose and everything to gain. They saw in Bacon not just a leader, but a vessel for their rage and hope. Under his banner, they launched unauthorized attacks against the tribes, killing indiscriminately and igniting further chaos along the frontier. When Berkeley labeled Bacon a rebel and ordered his arrest, the struggle transformed from a conflict over Indian policy into a full-fledged class war. Bacon and his men turned their fury on the colonial government itself. In the summer of 1676, they marched on Jamestown, the seat of Virginia's power, demanding reforms, protection from Indian raids, an end to political corruption, and a more equitable distribution of land. The rebellion gathered momentum like a storm. Across the colony, poor whites, former indentured servants, and even some enslaved Africans joined the ranks. The lines between social classes blurred as a coalition of the dispossessed rose up against the entrenched aristocracy. For a fleeting moment, the rigid hierarchy of colonial Virginia buckled under the weight of popular anger. Berkeley, outmatched and abandoned by many of his allies, fled Jamestown. Bacon entered triumphantly and set about enacting his vision of reform. But his leadership was as fiery and unstable as the rebellion itself. Suspicious of enemies within, he had several men hanged as traitors. Jamestown was soon engulfed in flames, literally, as Bacon ordered the town burned to prevent its recapture. Smoke rose from the ashes of the colonial capital, an unmistakable symbol of revolution. Yet the rebellion, like its leader, burned too hot to last. In October 1676, Bacon fell ill, possibly of dysentery, and died suddenly. Without his leadership, the movement quickly unraveled. The colonial elite, aided by reinforcements from England, reasserted control with swift and brutal efficiency. Rebels were hunted down, trials were held, and dozens were hanged. Berkeley, now back in power, showed no mercy, even as King Charles II recalled him to England in disgust over his excessive cruelty. Despite its failure, Bacon's rebellion left deep scars on Virginia's soul. It had exposed the raw nerve of class resentment in a colony that had long masked its inequality behind promises of opportunity and prosperity. The ruling class took the lesson to heart. Fearing future alliances between poor whites and enslaved Africans who had fought side by side in the uprising, the elite moved quickly to divide them. Laws were passed to harden the racial caste system, granting privileges to poor whites while deepening the bondage of black slaves. This strategy, deliberate and calculated, would define the American South for centuries. Bacon's rebellion thus became more than a footnote in colonial history. It marked a turning point, the beginning of racialized slavery as a tool of social control, and the end of a brief moment when solidarity among the oppressed threatened to upend the colonial order. For the poor farmers, laborers, and dreamers who had followed Bacon into battle, the rebellion was a tragic hope, a glimpse of a different future that never came to pass. They had risen not only to defend their homes, but to claim their dignity in a world that had stolen it. Though they were crushed, their defiance reverberated through the years, whispered in every tavern where men spoke of tyranny, echoed in every field where laborers dreamed of land and freedom, and in the ashes of Jamestown, where the fire of rebellion once burned bright, history recorded not just the fall of a rebel, but the first great warning that power unchecked will breed resistance, that even in the deepest shadows of oppression, the seeds of revolt will grow. For the colonial elite, the rebellion was a terrifying glimpse into the fragility of their control. They saw, perhaps for the first time, that the real danger to their dominance did not come from the distant crown or neighboring tribes, but from within their own society. The revolt had united men from vastly different backgrounds: poor white, farmers, runaway servants, even enslaved Africans, who found common cause in their shared suffering and exclusion. That unity was an existential threat to the carefully crafted social order. In response, the Virginia elite entrenched their rule, not just with muskets and gallows, but with ideology, embedding inequality more deeply into law and custom to prevent such alliances from ever forming again. Historians have long debated whether Bacon was a true champion of the poor or merely an opportunist, exploiting their grievances for personal power. But to the men who followed him, such questions likely mattered little. They saw a man who dared to stand up against injustice, a man who voiced their anger when others would not. In the pages of official records, they were labeled rebels, traitors, criminals. Yet in the hearts of those who yearned for justice and dignity, they were something more, a spark in the dark, a sign that even the lowliest could rise when pushed too far. Bacon's rebellion may have failed in its immediate goals, but it left behind a powerful legacy, a reminder that no system of oppression is beyond challenge when the people unite.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.